Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everyone here with us in Maui, as well as people who are tuning in live to this broadcast. It's a special, historic moment. The first time that Ram Dass and Eckhart Tolle have ever been on stage together. This is a whole lot of now. Be Here Now and The Power of Now, two books that each, perhaps more than any other two books published, influenced hundreds of thousands and continue to influence hundreds of thousands of people and introduce them, tear a veil away to the present moment. And when we have now and now together, there's a type of multiplication, I think, our experience together here. I'd ask everybody to listen with the ear of your heart. Sometimes Eckhart asks people to listen to the space between the words, that's where the real impact often can be found. Not just in the conceptual messaging, but in the space. And listening with the ear of our heart is a similar type of listening. As many of you know, I'm sure most of you know, Ram Dass, as he puts it, was stroked by God in 1998. And so his speech can be quite slow on occasion. And I think if we listen with the ear of our heart, we'll be tuning in to what's most essential. So to begin with, talking about the heart, I really want to start right off, right here at the beginning, to ask Eckhart and Ram Dass to speak some about love as another word for now. Is it another word for now? Is it the feeling dimension of the now? I mean, Eckhart, you so often speak of stillness. It has a different flavor than love, at least in my experience. So, love as the feeling dimension of the now.
I use the word sparingly. There are certain misconceptions around love because there are so many different types of love. It's sometimes hard to get away from the idea that love is some kind of wanting. I love this. And in the Spanish language, the usual expression for I love you means I want you. And that's very true in romantic love. You want the other person. And as, don't remember who said it, in true love, you want the other person's good. In romantic love, you want the other person. And so other languages have different words for love to distinguish between the emotional wanting and something deeper, agape, metta, and so on. The Dalai Lama says, my religion is kindness. He uses that word, kindness. So these words point to something within you, an essence from where you perceive and interact with the outside world in a very different way from the usual mentalized, conceptualized perception of reality around you, including other human beings. The usual way to relate for people who have not awakened to that deeper level that I often call essence, or your essence identity, the usual way is to relate to other human beings through mental concepts or judgments. They become the veil that comes in between you and your perception of reality. And awakening is to become free of the compulsion to judge continuously, to interpret continuously, to label and name continuously what's around you and whoever you are with. And when that compulsion to label everything mentally, the conceptualized reality, when that subsides, and that subsides when presence arises, then you sense something in whatever you perceive that is a kind of recognition, whether it's a human being or whether it's any other being, natural, a tree or an animal. You recognize something in the other that before, when you were naming and labeling, you couldn't. When you were naming and labeling, the other was always the other. And nature also was conceptualized. Especially human beings become conceptualized, and that the other. In the egoic state, the ego actually emphasizes the otherness of others by continuously criticizing, judging, have opinions, and mistaking every viewpoint for the truth. Every thought that comes in, that's how he is, that's how she is. And so there can be no love there, although that egoic entity sometimes talks about love, or it says, you need to love your neighbor as yourself, it says. I'm trying very hard. And that phrase, of course, comes from Jesus, who said, love your neighbor as yourself, which really means recognize your neighbor, the other, as yourself. And that recognition, that sensing, when you look at another human being in the spaciousness of just this. That's sometimes called it the formless dimension. What you're looking at is form. What you're looking at is the physical body, and also what you are perceiving is the mental form, the psychological form of that person. If you go beyond form, what you perceive in the other, you sense through your own presence, the presence of the other, that which cannot be seen. It's the essence of everything. If you have we have a little dog that's, at the moment we think, oh, hope he'll survive, she'll survive, she has a heart disease. When this dog dies, hopefully not for a while, all you're left with is the fur and the what's behind the fur, the bones and the intestines and so on, the essence is no longer there. The essence of that being is no longer there. But when you look at the live dog, you can sense an essence of beingness, the beingness in the other. Sometimes it's easier with animals than with humans, because what you have with humans is a lot of mental identifications. So you sense the beingness because you sense your own beingness. And that's the heart sometimes. I don't use that very often, but that you could call that perceiving from the heart. You use the word more often. Perceiving from the heart is to perceive from the beingness. And then you sense the beingness of the other. And that recognition is the recognition of oneness. And that's love. Love is sensing that you share the consciousness. Because what you love in the other ultimately is the consciousness. You don't love, it's nice to touch the fur of the dog or to touch another human being, to touch the skin, but ultimately what you love in the other is something that you cannot perceive, that is beyond the senses, you cannot mentalize. So to perceive through that space of love is to be free of the compulsion to mentalize and conceptualize. And that in practical terms it looks like this. I'm looking at Ram Dass. Without conceptualization, if I conceptualize, I have some image. I say, oh, here's the famous guru. He wrote that book, or I have whatever concepts I have. Can I look at him without any concepts? And there's suddenly a meeting in stillness, because that's really what it is. When you look at something without naming it, you look through the stillness. And I'm inviting, I know he's already in stillness, and I'm inviting everybody here at this very moment to perceive and look the totality of this room, the environment, whatever is around us, not through any naming, but through simple, the alert space of stillness. Be the space of stillness.
I would like to speak that love is not part.
It only appears the moment you conceptualize. And so that's how stillness and love are related, very closely. And the now, of course, is all part of it. The stillness is the essence of now. And so love arises. Our destiny is to live in that way as our normal state of consciousness. And then, of course, the world would become transformed if enough humans live in that space. We'll come back to that. Because basically we're always talking about the one, we're always pointing to the one essential truth, which is the truth of who you are.
I would like to speak that love is not part of the emotions, rather that love is soul talk. Soul talk. Because let's see here. We are each souls, and then we are one. These are two different levels of consciousness. when the individual soul meets another individual soul, there is a recognition that it is a soul. And the ego is rooted in negatives stuff. And the soul is rooted in love. So that when you were in your ego, you were anxious and you are separate from everybody else. When the soul is separate from another soul, but they have a recognition of the shared consciousness. When you have when you are perceiving from your soul, other people look like souls. Like, for example, if you go into a store, there are different people playing different roles. There's the customer and the clerk. But I go into that store and I see these are souls, and they're playing these roles only on this incarnation. And they've only chosen these roles because of their unique karma. Is that a word that's, yeah, I guess so.
question about this, which is, not only do you use the word love sparingly in your teachings, but you don't use the word soul very much either. I often hear you talk about how our conceptual thinking keeps us separate from this field of oneness and being, but the idea of an individual soul, I'm curious if you could comment how that fits for you.
I never decided not to use the word soul, it just didn't come up. I never decided not to use the word soul, it just didn't come up. In the same way, I don't use God very often. Soul, to me, means, as Ramdas just said, you walk into a store or anywhere in any place, you see all these different human beings, different forms. And it's lovely to see the multiplicity of life forms around you without needing to believe that the essential reality of every human being you see or come into contact with is the form that you see or the role that they play. That's only a temporary thing, but you can still enjoy the multiplicity of life forms and even enjoy, you see the roles that people play. You can only enjoy it, really, if there is a recognition of something deeper in the other. And if you have that recognition of something deeper in the other, and you can only do it through recognizing who you are beyond your role and beyond your form, which is consciousness, the light of consciousness, the formless. Consciousness has taken on a temporary form, and so the universe produces billions, trillions, infinite life forms, even on this planet alone, even in the human form alone. Every human being different in some way. It's amazing. But if you only see the differences, then you're trapped on that level. You need to be able to sense your essential reality of consciousness, to be able to enjoy the play of forms. Because otherwise the play of forms not only keeps you trapped, you pursue some kind of, you're seeking some kind of thing through forms, fulfillment through other forms, other humans, you want, that's the ego again, other humans wanting to fulfill you. And now for my next song. That's the role that comes with this. So as we sit here, these are just temporary forms. This form will be gone soon, this form will be gone soon, and sooner or later all these forms will have dissolved like soap bubbles. And all that remains is the one that expressed itself through the many. And if you know yourself as the one, which happens when the mind, the stream of thinking stops, and there's just an aware presence, a spacious, aware, formless presence. That's who you are beyond the form. And from there you can enjoy the play of forms. If you're not there, the play of forms is threatening. Or you seek continuously to fulfill yourself through grasping at forms. The play of forms is never satisfying unless you've touched within yourself the root of all satisfaction, which is beingness itself, consciousness itself. The Buddha already taught us that the unsatisfactory nature of things, he says, wherever you go, you'll find dukkha, suffering. No matter what situation you go into, there's always a crack in everything. And of course, in the words of, was it Leonard Cohen, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. So our meeting here, the things going wrong are actually beautiful, because that's how there's, for example, not being able to talk for a while, an opportunity for stillness. So it's welcoming whatever arises, and then being touched with that which doesn't change, consciousness itself, to feel, to sense at this very moment, to sense that still alert presence in you. So is that an individual presence, or is it an impersonal presence? I think you can't really distinguish between that. The sense of I, that is the formless consciousness, is at the basis of everybody's sense of identity, except that it gets mixed up with stories in the mind. But if you really go very deep, where does this sense of I really come from? Not the I, my story, or the I want and I need and I must have and so on. But the deeper sense of I-ness, the I am. I am the way, said Jesus. I think they left out one word. I am is the way. So, just sense, and then the distinction between personal and impersonal doesn't really arise anymore. It is the essence of anybody's sense of identity beyond form is consciousness, and that's the universal soul expressing itself as an individual. Now, is that the answer? I never asked myself, am I going to survive as this personal self? No, I don't have the sense that the person, but the essence of who I am is timeless. I know that. I don't really need to know the details of what the essence of who I am. What's the essence of who I am that timeless going to do in the future?
I mean, it seems to me that you blend in the individual soul and the collective oneness that for you that mushes in quite naturally.
Yes.
You don't find the need to make that distinction.
No, but these are because a lot of it is just words. Buddhism, Hinduism. You have in Hinduism Atman, the God within is the Atman. The Buddhists say no, there is no Atman. It's just emptiness. They're talking about the same thing because the Atman is formless. So emptiness is in some ways more helpful because you can't believe in it. The moment you say that there is an Atman, you start believing in something, you have another mental concept. So the Buddha was very good at making it very hard for people to believe in what he said. Very hard, because you can't say, we believe in emptiness. Well, maybe they do it in the Buddhist monasteries, but it wasn't meant to be said like that. It wasn't meant to be realized. And the moment you realize this, yes, of course, it's Atman and emptiness is the same.
from this soul from individual souls, and as we agree that we see in each other the Atman, the I've thought, well, it's not a thought. The soul is awareness, and since my guru said to love everybody, I said the soul was loving awareness. And when he said to me, love everybody, first of all, the politicians, I love them. I mean, certain ones I could bear, but I can't. I said, Maharaji, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't love everybody. And that was my ego. Because ego, judging. Soul doesn't judge. Now I live in the soul, and I can love the walls and the ceiling and all of you and me and the wheelchair and Eckhart and everybody. You too. And I thought I was psychotic because because as I love the wall, it gets closer, and the love becomes melding to me and to the wall and the trees and the ocean, because I think that we are one, but we will only feel that when we love everything. Love everything. And when I was up here, my ego, I was judging and judging and judging myself. And love that person, but love that person, and love that person. But the soul, you're like the ocean of love. You're floating in the ocean of love. And that makes you love everything, including that wall. I had a humorous experience. I told an audience that I loved everything. And I said, I love this rug. And it was a restaurant. And the rug was spotted, and I could love that. And a friend of mine, Mickey Lemley, came up, had been in the audience, and he said, look, I love the trees that Gauguin painted, but I can't love that rug. I said, judging. And so he sent me for my 80th birthday a piece of rug, and with a spot in the middle. And he said, maybe you'd like to substitute this for your guru on the wall. I wouldn't have. He didn't see that I could do that. And he was losing. He was losing by his judging mind. Because I was moving towards oneness with love. Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. You should mention the walls and what looks like inanimate objects. I also find often I pick up an object, it could be maybe just a bar of soap or a pen, and there is an appreciation of its existence, just a moment of appreciating it. The mind could explain it and say, well, that's because ultimately everything emanates from the one, assumes a form, and then changes again. So ultimately, whatever you see or perceive is an emanation of the one. And if you recognize the one in yourself, you can recognize it in any form. And one wouldn't usually call that love, but in a deeper sense, it is a love, it is an appreciation of whatever is around you. And again, it's to do with the world of form, to live in that balance between relating in the world of form and being rooted in the formless, which traditionally perhaps would be called spirit, whatever. So in this dance, and in yourself you can sense, and I'll just describe a brief moment when we were driving here today. There's always, of course, there's this temporary body sitting in the car, and there's the mind, there's a name attached to it, and a personal identity. So there's two of you here, so to speak. Don't take it all too literally, it's just we're using pointers only. There's two of you here, the form. This is Eckhart, the spiritual teacher, concept, who is going to meet another spiritual teacher, another concept, and even they're going to have a dialogue. But there was very little of that. In the periphery of consciousness, I knew that was also true. But the essential truth was, here's a space of consciousness moving and perceiving. So at any moment you can be either more on the side of form, or you can be more on the side of the formless. And the most satisfying way to live is to be more in the dimension of the formless. So as I was traveling in the car, I was really not there as a person, but simply as a space of consciousness. There was no thought. When there's no thought, that's what happens. Just that. And then, if a person were traveling to an important event, how can a person not be anxious? The thinking would arise, how is it going to work out? What's he going to say? What am I going to? Are they going to like us? All kinds of stuff will happen. But if you are, and really the essence of it all is to be able to be, and I know the people here and the people who are tuning in from elsewhere are able to recognize the truth of what I'm saying, and that is, more and more humans are now able to enter that state where they don't need to think. The compulsion to think goes, and thinking is replaced by presence, stillness, alert, beautiful space of stillness. So if you can be, at any moment, be that, and you still know, of course you're still a person for a while, and there's no need when somebody asks you, how old are you, or what is your name, you don't need to say, I am nameless and timeless. You can still go with the conventions and say, well, that's my age and that's my name. You're quite a normal, you use the conventions of form, you still can operate in the world of form, but you're rooted somewhere else in spacious consciousness. For a while, when the transition happened to me, I was so much in the space that for a while I couldn't operate on the level of form very well. And then after a few years, the balance came back. That's so really the essence, I think you will agree, I'm sure, is freedom from thought to access that dimension in yourself. Ramana Maharshi said, the true criterion whether you are making progress on the spiritual path, that's what somebody asked him that question, how can I measure my progress on the spiritual path? And Ramana Maharshi said, the degree of absence of thinking is the measure of progress on your spiritual path. It's easy. Now you know.
You mentioned earlier the word karma, and I wanted to ask you something about that. I think that many people would say that the sudden awakening, Eckhart, that you had was some kind of fabulous good karma, extraordinary karma, grace itself. Ram Dass, your experience meeting your guru, Neem Karoli Baba, and the kind of heart awakening that happened, very good karma, extraordinary karma. And then your stroke, being stroked. Somebody might say, well, that doesn't look like such good karma to me. In fact, that looks kind of like yucky karma. And I'm curious what you feel about that, both of you, this idea of the good and bad karma of our lives.
Well, this is this question of grace and karma. My meeting my guru, he knew that was going to happen. And because my knowing that and seeing his mind, his awareness, it would make me think, grace. I was graced to have this meeting. And I would think this his grace to me. But I think it was my awareness of his awareness that led me to that conclusion. Because if he had awareness of my life through my entire life. I mean, his my mother died of a spleen illness. And my guru said, she was big in the stomach and big in the stomach, and this is all in Hindi, and he said, and then it was the spleen. And the word spleen he gave in English. It was my mother's dying was being used to help me that was a siddhi, a power he had. And that's what led me to say it was grace. In fact, I just live in grace, because like I was a psychologist, and a psychologist, I wouldn't read the Bhagavad Gita. I'd be that funny book. And then down the hall from me in my office was Tim Leary. And so I took mushrooms. And that opened me up to meet Maharaji and to meet the Bhagavad Gita. I look at all these stages And and my guru knew that. That's grace. That's grace.
I don't see grace as happening as the result necessarily of good karma. Grace can erupt at any stage. It can erupt into bad karma. It can erupt into good karma. It's somehow from another dimension, something comes in. In my case, I would say it came because of bad karma. Without all the suffering, having a childhood that was unhappy, parents continuously fighting and no harmony in the environment, often lack of money, and then they got divorced, and it was great shame for me when I was 10. Not many parents were divorced at that time. So I had to hide that fact. Countless things came in. My dad, I loved him on one level, and on another level, I hated him. I had a dream because he was like a powder keg that could erupt at any powder keg, like an unexploded bomb. They could erupt at any moment. So I lived my whole childhood with an unexploded, often the unexploded bomb exploded. So that's not good karma. And so the young adult became unhappy. It had absorbed unhappiness from the environment and so on. And so all that's not good karma, but because of that bad karma, the suffering became unbearable, and then a surrender happened when the suffering became unbearable, and there was the eruption suddenly of grace. Now the question may arise, I may not be able to answer it, but I'll ask it. The fact that surrender happened in the midst of the suffering, that must be grace. That's probably right. So, who knows? Surrender happened, and with surrender, grace could suddenly flow in fully. Grace is the essence of who you are, coming through the form, so that in grace then you're not, the density of the form lessens, and as it lessens, grace is able to flow through. The density of the form lessens through surrender or acceptance of the simple thing, for let's say, acceptance of the present moment as it is, as a spiritual practice. If you make that your spiritual practice, you may not succeed all the time. That's fine. Have compassion with yourself. And if you don't succeed in accepting what is, then accept that at this moment I can't accept what is. So you have another level of acceptance behind the non-acceptance. I can accept that anger arises in me at this moment. That's what is. If I deny it, I should be accepting. Why can't I accept the present moment? Or even better, the mind talk. You have two people. So, why can't you? You see, you can't do it. You failed again. That's the self-talk of the ego. Instead, be compassionate, so when you cannot accept, then recognize that and allow the emotion to be there, you still have some space then. And so there's still grace, because grace is space, really. Oh, the words are quite similar, actually. Grace and space. Grace is when the space comes into you, the spaciousness of the unconditioned divine consciousness comes into your life. So the quickest way of inviting grace into your life is, as I sometimes put it, become friendly with the isness of this moment, no matter what form it takes, because it already is anyway, so why not say yes? Because it is, doesn't mean you can't take action, but at the moment it is. So, in other words, you go with what, it's an expression, you go with the flow of life, and the flow is always here and now. You never go against it. But so this is always the starting point, is the isness of this moment. So that's then if with that acceptance, the gate is open for grace to come in. If you complain about the difficulties or the unsatisfactory nature of the present moment, the door is closed. Or let's say the shutters are closed, the sunlight can't come in. It doesn't mean you are more powerful than the sun. The sun isn't concerned about your shutters. But so when you deny this, you are somehow against the present moment, or you treat it only as a means to an end because there is a more important place I want to get to. Grace can't operate in your life, or you only get a trickle just to keep you going, just an occasional trickle, occasionally when you go, oh, look at that sunset, and for a moment the complaining entity subsides, and there's a moment where grace can come in, and you can live on that for 3 weeks, one sunset. But of course, that's only a trickle. And so, to go from form to formlessness is done by accepting whatever form arises in the present moment, whatever form this moment takes. Immediately so, well, that's what is. With the acceptance of form, the formless opens up in you. And the ultimate truth of that is in the image of the crucifixion, which I see as goes beyond religion or anything. There is, some people dislike it. They say, oh, I don't like the image of this man on the cross. It's all to do with suffering and it's unhealthy and so on. But there is a deep meaning there that for a long time perhaps could not be expressed in an abstract way, and that meaning is here you have the image of complete suffering of a human. He is nailed to the cross, which is a torture instrument, and this human is able to surrender and accept, not my will, but thy will be done. And then suddenly the torture instrument becomes a symbol of the divine. Isn't that strange? The torture instrument has become a symbol of the divine. So through acceptance, whatever looks like an obstacle or even a dreadful thing becomes transformed. Every situation that's accepted deeply, and if it's a very big thing like a crucifixion, there needs to be very deep acceptance, and immediately there's a transformation. So the grace is hiding also in that which looks dreadful, the dreadful sufferings that we see all around us. They are there. but it's hiding, and you can only see the truth of this in yourself. I'm not saying anybody should believe in that. You have to find out for yourself that grace is hiding in what the seemingly dreadful things, even in little things that go wrong, but even more so in big things that go wrong, so to speak. And ultimately, you see, it's not wrong. It didn't go wrong. That what it looks like in the moment when you judge it. So that's the inviting grace into your life through bringing this deep yes to the present moment. And then your evolution accelerates. And the more you do that, the less you need the disasters. Because you cooperate with the flowering of consciousness. Consciousness wants to flower into this dimension, in this dimension. So it's welcoming, really, what is.
That was my stroke.
Yes.
Yeah. That I was in the hospital and I looked at all the doctors, nurses, my family, my friends were all, you have a stroke. And I felt by their minds rubbing off, I was feeling some terrible thing happened. And there was a picture on the wall of Maharaji, and he was, this stroke is grace. And there are three fellows here. They're my medical team. And I wouldn't have met them and we share philosophy and medical things. But I had the stroke. So that was a grace. And then I had before my stroke, I had a book, How Can I Help? It's called, How Can I Help? I was feeling I was helping. And after the stroke, I wrote a book, How Can You Help Me? I wouldn't have thought it possible that I was so dependent and find in myself. And I learned a lot about dependency. And that was positive. Positive.
Many of you have probably seen the film made of Ram Dass's life called Fierce Grace. I love that title.
Yeah.
Because when something major like that happens, it really is fierce. And when surrender happens there, it takes you very deep. So it's when fierce grace comes into your life, then that potential is there for going very deep, and that fierce grace burns up the illusory self. It's the fire in which the ego gets burned up. It can also be a place where the ego gets strengthened through saying, oh, dreadful, dreadful. It's all what happened to me. Life, how can life do that to me? How can God do that to me? Why did that happen to me? That blocks it, what is potentially a huge opening into burning up of, one could say, thousands of years of accumulations are burnt up in that fire. So that's perhaps good to know for anybody who is at this moment facing a major, very major challenge in life.
In just a couple of moments, we're going to open up to your questions and questions from our online audience as well. But before we do,
he's saying that the questions are nameless. People didn't write down their names, which is just as well. It's fine.
But before we go to these, I just had one last question that
Yes.
I wanted to ask you both. Ram Dass, you've mentioned a couple of times your relationship with Maharaji and how important he's been in your life. And I know that people actually look to the two of you, some people look to the two of you as a kind of guru figure for them, believe it or not. I've seen the photos in people's homes. And I'm curious, if somebody does look to you in that way, how do you think they could benefit the most from that relationship?
Shall I go? Okay. Oprah said to me, "You're not a guru, are you?" I said, "No, of course not." I don't see myself, of course, as a guru. I do know some people look at a photo. At first I was shocked when somebody told me they had their photo on my photo on their desk. And I thought, what for? But I then remembered, I saw a photo of, I still have it, Ramana Maharshi. There's particularly one photo of Ramana Maharshi that has incredible light coming through his eyes. And I remember years ago looking at that photo and feeling, sensing that deep stillness and peace and aliveness. But I also knew that that was not the form I was looking at. That was in me. I could sense that, and I could see the reflection of that peace and aliveness in the photo also. So it was a self-recognition. It acted a little bit like a mirror, and it was a self-recognition. But what this mirror shows is not it doesn't mirror the outer form to you. it mirrors the inner essence. Whenever you look at somebody, if the photo was taken of an awake being or even a person who at that moment is free of thought and in a state of just awareness, and something comes through the eyes that points to that. It is recognized by something in you when you look at it. It's nothing to do with the person whatsoever. And so what you sense is your own essential reality, reflected back to you by somebody who is free of all the stuff that usually covers it up. There's a line in the Course in Miracles, which is supposed to be Jesus talking, but of course that just means an expression of the awakened consciousness. So, or Christ, let's say Christ, Jesus is the person, Christ is the formless. So it says, in that line says, in the first person, I, meaning I, Christ, or Jesus, I have nothing that you do not have, except that I have nothing else. And so I'm now quite happy with people looking at my photo or looking at me, as long as they don't think they're looking at a person. The person is there on the surface. It's not important. You could say it's the window frame. What you see, with your senses, is the window frame. But the thing that happens, the important thing is the light that comes through the window. And the moment you recognize it, it's in you, because it's in you that you recognize it. Ah, that's how the reflection works. You can also, I recommend looking at, occasionally you can look into somebody else's eyes, and the similar thing can happen if you both are able to enter the state of aware presence while you look into each other's eyes. There's cessation of thinking. What's left when thinking ceases? Just awareness, pure, unconditioned consciousness. And you look at the other, and suddenly there is no other. There is a merging in the field of awareness. It's a beautiful practice where you transcend the personal in yourself and in the other. And that's a beautiful way of connecting. And so you see yourself in the other. There's the merging. That's a similar, it's a lovely spiritual practice if you don't overdo it. Just from time to time. And then you do the same in any situation. When you look at a human being, you're not conceptualizing that human being, and you're looking at yourself, the essential, not looking, but sensing the consciousness in the other through being consciousness yourself. And so it all works in the same way. So how do you feel about people looking at your photo?
I say to them, if you met a real one, you'd know.
You are the real one.
Yes, so are you.
Yeah.
And so is everybody here.
Yes.
Ramana Maharshi, that picture, oh boy, yum, yum, yum.
I read that when that picture was taken of Ramana Maharshi, The photographer Ramana Maharshi said to the photographer, "Is there enough light?" And the photographer said to him, "You are the light." And it worked.
We have a question here from the audience that I think is really important as a part of our conversation, which is, how can you love violence, crime, and starvation? To name a few examples, I'd add in microphone noise. How can you love these things?
Yeah, I'll start. You don't love what people do, you love who they are in their essence. And often what they do is deluded. It's based on delusion because they don't know who they are. So unconsciousness operates through those humans. You don't love what they do, but you look, whenever you meet a human being, even if the human being is a criminal or has perpetrated acts of violence, there is in them somewhere something that is pure, that is the essence of who they are. And that's what when you look, and if the human being is heavily burdened by egoic delusion or a heavy pain body, you need to be more intensely present with that human being. And it can happen that this also applies to a human being who is mentally unbalanced. It is sometimes possible, if you're absolutely present, you draw out, not through an act of will, but just because it happens, you draw out of that human being something that is beyond the delusion, the essence of who they are. It may only be temporary, but it's there. So you love the individual human. And now how can you love a disturbing noise? Love is not necessarily an active thing. Love often is in the allowing. It's the gesture of the Virgin Mary, for example. There's a feminine quality there, which is the embrace everything. So you can embrace the loud noise, although you might get a shock maybe there. That doesn't mean you resisted the noise. There's the shock, and immediately after the shock, there is the allowing. You can practice that when you bump into something. I sometimes recommend that as another spiritual practice, because sometimes you bump into something with your elbow or your foot, and there's a sharp pain. And usually there's the pain, and immediately after the pain, you shout something. It may be a 4-letter word. Usually it's 4 letters. And it's quite a lovely practice if you bump into something and the pain is there, but immediate acceptance and no comment or commentary or further reaction except the physical reaction. It's just quite lovely. And then, nothing else. So the sharp noise, you don't say, "Oh, I love this sharp noise." No, it's embraced in the, "I allow you to be here." That's the love, really, rather than "I love you." No, but I allow you to be here at this moment in the way you are. And the you can be a person or a situation. I allow you to be as you are in this moment. That's love. Rather than feeling I love you. This is...
There's a follow-up question here for you, Eckhart, which is, are there any instances where you are unable to accept what is? Anything that makes you impatient, judgmental, or angry?
There are moments of anger that can happen. Usually don't last very long. There's an awareness in the background that accepts the anger when it happens. So one is not totally in the grip of the anger, but a space around it. Or sadness can arise. I sometimes cry when I see something sad, or somebody dying. For example, we were walking in Italy last year, visiting a small town, and the church bells were ringing. The people with me were walking on, and I was just standing at the square in front of the church, and they were carrying out a coffin. And some of the relatives were standing around, and I wept. I don't know who died. I have no idea of that person, because to me that moment was it embodied the death of every human being that ever lived and ever will live. It embodied the impermanence of the human condition, and I cried, but it wasn't a crying of despair. There was a beauty, there was a peacefulness underneath the crying, but I did cry. I didn't say that there should be no death, or death is a travesty. No, there was an acceptance, but nevertheless, it's just actually a beautiful experience. But the deep sadness there was, but underneath it there was a knowing of there is something that doesn't die, that's there. So that's how an emotional can still exist within the spaciousness.
Anything to say about loving what seems unlovable?
Something what?
Any more to say about loving what seems at first unlovable?
I love it all. I mean, even that, and even that. And you've got to you bring it towards you. And we all had a chance to love a dictator this year, and he was a form that was causing suffering to many people. Does that make him unlovable? I think that each form is a form of God.
Sometimes in heavy disguise.
What?
Heavy disguise sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
There's another question here, wondering how Eckhart and Ram Dass perceive psychedelics and or sacred plant medicine. Ram Dass, at this point in your life, as a vehicle to explore consciousness.
The expert first.
It's great. It's great. The mushroom trip that I took left the group and a quiet room. And I was on a couch, and I saw there was somebody else in the room. But the room was dark. It's just, I felt there's somebody else. And I looked over there, the corner of the room, and each of my roles, my cello playing and they were a kitsch, roles. And Richard that my parents gave me. And I said, oh, this drug, I might have amnesia. Or at least I have in my body. And I looked down, and there was the couch, and there was no body on it. And my eyes were open. Huh. And I wanted to call help, but then who wanted to call help? All my roles are there. My body was gone. Somebody, something, some. And I rolled in the snow out in some hills. I rolled and rolled. And I was at Tim's house, and my father and mother's house only 2 blocks away. The snowstorm was up to my knees. And I walked over to there, and their walk, they were old, and I was young, and I shovel from the garage. I thought I'd really, it's my heart told me that I shovel there, walk. And I shoveled, and I was really out there. And then I looked up at the window, and they were having peeved looks. I couldn't, but that was, they were, up until then, I always other people's eyes, whether I was being reasonable. But they were peeved. And I danced a jig around the shovel. And I waved at them, smiling. That was the first time I'd ever stand up to external external whatever that was.
Authority.
Yeah. And then I found out that they were peeved. It was 4:30 in the morning. I was happy with I was going to shovel their walk. But they live in little boxes. When one doesn't shovel the walk, nobody shovels the walk at that hour. Oh.
Is there any more, Ram Dass, you want to say about psychoactive plants and what you consider their? I mean, just a sort of summary statement about.
Well, it took me from psychology to Maharaji. That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Yes, that says it.
That's pretty good.
It must have been powerful.
Yes. Yes. Look, I never tell anybody to do it on their own or to do it by my say-so. All I say is what happened to me. And yum, 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 yum. And I'm being facetious, but people don't realize these are very, very powerful plants. And they should not be used, well, they should or shouldn't, I don't know. When they've been used, they should be they should, God should be your co-pilot.
Very good.
Yeah.
And Eckhart? I think our questioner really wanted your perception.
Of course, I can only go on the basis of my own experience, which is very limited. I'll tell you very briefly what it is. And one quite a recent experience. It's amazing that it took me so long to try pot. But we were in Amsterdam last year. And somebody got me high quality pot to smoke. And I thought, well, I might as well try it. Because people often ask me questions about it. It's like, is it like meditation, or is it useful? So I smoked, and what I said when it took effect was, it's like maple syrup for the brain. It felt like the mind is kind of... And I can see it can be a wonderful thing for somebody whose mind is very active, and it finally slows down for once. Now, since my mind is not that active, it wasn't, I didn't feel it as great or even wanted to do it again, but it was interesting. And I can see how it could be helpful to some people who are burdened by a dreadful mind that never stops. Not as a permanent measure, but perhaps to open a door and then go on and actually meditate and practice presence and so on. And similarly, acid, I don't know when it was, 15 years ago, I was already doing counseling and doing little workshops, and often people said, is it, was acid helpful? I said, I don't know, I haven't tried it. And finally somebody got me some, and I took it, and again, very limited experience. My experience was simply that the sense perceptions became extremely heightened, so like everything was shouting at me, the colors, the smells, the physical sensory touch, Everything was like turning up the volume on everything. And it's so much so I could see I didn't lose any awareness. So the awareness was there, observing what was happening. It was interesting, and I immediately realized that for some people, it also stops their mind, because when you perceive so in such intensity, you have no time to comment on what you're perceiving, so you're just bombarded by sense perceptions, so the mind just shuts up for a while, and you just go, wow. And this is the experience some people have with looking at a teapot and finding incredible depth and aliveness there, which I already have without it. I can look at a teapot and feel its aliveness. Maybe it's not shouting at me, but there's a subtle thing there. It has a presence. So I don't need things to shout at me, but I can see how for somebody who is totally immersed in mental noise, it can be again an opening. That's really all it is. There's also a sacred dimension, of course, to other substances like mushrooms and so on, which I have not experienced. That goes back thousands of years, that practice as part of, not as a recreation, but as part of a sacred journey within that cultural context, and I think that's probably extremely valid, and it may have to wait for another lifetime before I try that.
We have a question here from someone in the online audience who says, when someone has dementia or Alzheimer's, their being seems to disappear. As I spend time with my 93-year-old mom, I start to question what it is you're pointing to. Can you speak to this?
There's sometimes an intermediate stage in Alzheimer when people don't remember their problems. I had a friend whose mother had Alzheimer, and in that intermediate stage, she, for the first time in her life, she became happy, because during that intermediate stage, she couldn't remember her problems. She was beginning to forget who she was. So that was something that also happens, of course, when you become more present, but that's very different. When you become more present, you rise above thinking. And when you develop this loss of memory, or even when you take certain things like alcohol, then you begin to fall below thinking, which can be quite pleasant if thinking is a torture for you, which for many people it is, because they torture themselves through their mind. If you fall below thinking, then you go, oh. But there's no growth in awareness, you're moving towards sleep. So in the intermediate stage of Alzheimer, there are some people, it seems, who experience that freedom from the mind, but then you go more into it, and I see the mind or the brain as something through which the non-local consciousness that pervades the entire universe assumes a particular form. So the brain or the mind is an instrument for consciousness to move through into this dimension, and a focal point for consciousness. And when the brain decays, which seems to be the case with Alzheimer, the brain can no longer fulfill the function of being the focal point for consciousness, and consciousness then withdraws from there, and that gives the appearance that the being that was there is gradually disappearing, and it is. It's a slow death. You die before the physical vehicle dies. So the consciousness can no longer move through the brain, the mind, and so it goes back, and what is left with is then just the beginning of death of the form. So the mind form dies before the physical vehicle dies. That's how I see it. The consciousness is still there, but it's no longer in this dimension.
Ramdas, you said something interesting when we were talking previously. You said that the stroke affected your body, but not who you are. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
This is a vehicle in this plane of consciousness. I'm using it. I am using it. I'm not identified with it. So it's either, so I've said, the body had the stroke. I didn't have the stroke.
Mm-hmm.
And when I go into the present moment, which is not time and space, it's infinite. That's who I am. That's who I am. And I don't think I don't think I'm ego either. They're all ego and body. They are part of this incarnation, but I am not part of this incarnation because I'm just visiting this incarnation.
Then I just wanted to end with one final question to make a full circle from where we started. We started talking about love, not as an emotion, but as an experience of the present moment, as an aspect of the present moment. And to end, I'm wondering if you were each only able to give us one pointer to how we could tune to this love in the now, what would that pointer be?
I'm sure you all know it already. Two days ago we visited Ramdas, and when I left I saw the license plate on his car. On the license plate there was a normal license number, but above and below it said, "I'd rather be here now." Of course, the usual thing is I'd rather be fishing, I'd rather be golfing. So I'd rather be here now. Be here now is really the key, because embracing the present, acknowledging the present, realizing that there is only ever this, is really all that's needed, to be the presence rather than to be the mind-made entity. So I sometimes put it like this. This didn't occur to me when I was writing The Power of Now. It came later. You are the now. In essence, on the surface, the now is what happens. In the depths of now, the now is the space in which it happens. So that which happens is the world of form, coming and going and coming and going. And the space in which it happens is the unconditioned, formless, timeless, unborn, the uncreated, the unmanifested, pure consciousness itself, the one, or the light of the one. You could say perhaps it's the light of the one. And so, be the now, be the space for what happens, rather than continuously reacting to what happens and being hypnotized by the world of form. So it's the de-hypnosis. The world of form includes the thinking. Every thought is a thought form, very hypnotic. Every thought says, look at me, follow me here. No, follow me. And then you go on for hours. You follow the thought which leads to another thought, and it draws you in. It draws gravity, gravitational pull. And then you become a person who lives like that. Completely absent, only in here. Even when they meet somebody, they go, they don't see you, only their thoughts about you. So that's stepping out of all that into presence. Be the now, be the space for what is.
Hard to top that. I mean, when you meet somebody and they say, who are you? You give him a name or your role or something like that. But when you are alone and you see, who am I? There is awareness, and love. And you can, I am loving awareness. I am loving awareness. I am loving awareness. I am loving awareness.
Many thanks, everybody. Many thanks to Eckhart and Ram.